Hello again, it is good to be back while Michelle takes a well-earned break, and I'm delighted to introduce tonight's intellectual heavyweights for you. They're going to be helping me, why are you laughing? It's true, to tackle the stories of the day. Alex Dean, PR consultant, is here. Frank Faridi, author and academic, and Nabila Ramdani, journalist and broadcaster. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I also want to know your thoughts. Get in touch with me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or on Twitter @gbnews, or my own account, which is @BeverlyTurner. And can I also remind you to subscribe to our YouTube page? You can watch live or see the best bits from the channel when you search GB News. Now, Easter weekend is here. We should be chilling out, shouldn't we? Visiting family and trying to stop the kids eating too much chocolate. But instead, Britain will be trapped in gridlock, unable to travel by train, queuing at airports, and sitting bumper to bumper on the ironically named smart motorways. It's all so predictable and infuriating. If you're affected by the chaos, do let me know this evening. I would love to know how you're getting on. Vent your frustration with us here, won't you, at GB News on Twitter. Didn't we have months to fix this mess? Why, I've been thinking all day, when everyone was working from home, didn't anyone take the opportunity to upgrade our woefully inadequate rail network and do all of the work that clearly does need to be done? Now, Frank, coming to you first. You've had to change your plans this weekend, haven't you, because of all the disruption?
I did. Living in Kent, which is like the worst part of the country, where you have diversions everywhere. It began yesterday by coming back from my gym. Usually it takes 5 minutes to get from the gym to home. It's a 45-minute journey.
On the train? In
the car. Because the roads were clogged up because the police were stopping trucks and lorries on the grounds that they had to re-divert them because of the problems in Dover. So that was the beginning. Then I get a phone call from some people who I invited for Sunday lunch tomorrow. And they said that they've just given up, because the trains were slow and it was beautiful outside. They didn't want to spend their life indoors in a train station or hoping that the train gets there in time.
Or on the bus, which would replace the rail.
Or on the bus. But then I'm coming here to the studio, and I give myself an extra hour to come down from Kent. So the train is really slow. At this point, I decide I'm going to drive, because if I drive to Ebbsfleet station, it'll be all right, because then it's a short journey. So I get to Ebbsfleet, I get to London. You get on the Metropolitan line, and trains are cancelled. Then finally, I'm told to go to Baker Street, and there I have to wait 15 minutes for the next train, by which time the clock is ticking. And at this point, despite my age and my physical deterioration, I started running to get here on time.
That's going to the gym does that for you, Frank.
So it worked in the end. But to me, this is just ridiculous. And if there's one positive thing I would suggest to our government, why don't you nationalize P&O for 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months? Get that sorted out.
P&O?
P&O in particular. Why don't you take seriously what's happening in the ports in Kent, and to make sure that we don't have shortages, sort of all kinds of stuff, the lorries are able to get by, and that people can enjoy this summer.
Well, you have faith that the government will run it better than the private business, maybe in a way that I wouldn't necessarily have.
Only for 6 months.
Ooh, I think, isn't the problem though, Alex, it's, when you say for 6 months, in a sense, some of these institutes, some of these sort of, our transport network, they are literally like, they are behemoths, nothing changes quickly, I get that. But Alex, what can we do? Because there are going to be thousands of people who are listening to this today, who are millions of people who are listening on the radio or sat in their car, they're watching at home, and they share our frustrations this evening, don't they? Sure. Do we just get used to it, Alex? Is this just what Great Britain is?
We've been used to it for a long time, and I think the difference, the inflection point, is what you've pointed out, that we had an opportunity over a period of months, 2 years of periodic lockdowns to try to address it. There is something different about the situation now, though, which is that our working patterns have changed. The traditional excuse for making a hash of weekends like this one, the long weekend over Easter, is that passenger numbers are lower. But I'm sure that we'll see over the coming year, because people aren't working on Mondays and Fridays in the same way, we could be far more imaginative about the way that we do these upgrades. And I know that it may take more than a day sometimes, and you may need to bite into a weekend. But for heaven's sake, up and down the country, rail replacement bus services every time. That's got to be avoided. That's the nightmare. And by the way, they don't give you a discount or a rebate, do they? You've paid for the train, but you get the bus service.
Yeah.
You don't get a penny back.
No. Nabila, do we just... How do we cope with this? Because I think what Alex is saying, I agree with it. We've got these there's many more of us working from home now. There isn't the same presenteeism in an office. Should we therefore, when normally works are scheduled on the bank holiday weekend, because I presume the logic is, well, it's more important that you make money than see your family. The last 2 years has really kind of thrown that up in the air and fallen in all sorts of different shapes. What do we do now, and whose responsibility is it?
Well, to be fair, I don't think anybody can prevent travel chaos nowadays, not least of all in a relatively small country like Britain. And we often forget that moving around in massive numbers is due to new advances in transportation and indeed communications. And airfares, for example, have reached rock bottom prices, and it's far easier to book air travel tickets, for example. I think what has happened is that huge sections of society have lost their freedom during the pandemic lockdowns, and they are now all at once there are millions of them who want to take advantage of travel restrictions being swept away.
But that's not a surprise, though, is it?
I think it draws, more crucially, draws attention to fault lines in the infrastructure of transport and indeed to the inherent difficulties of processing millions of people. I mean, there are evidently staff shortages, which is a huge problem for airlines and for those who are running airports and other transport hubs in general. And just because travel restrictions have now been largely swept away, it doesn't mean that security has gone away. And for example, we're hearing that airlines are saying that it takes up to 6 months, for example, to vet new security screening staff who are desperately needed following the pandemic. So it's almost like the whole travel industry has been hibernating, and now it's waking up to huge demands that they have to respond to in a few months.
I don't think we need to be fatalistic about it, because it seems to me that we've got the wherewithal to do something. So, for example, the argument was that if we use railways a lot, then that will take the pressure off the roads. What happens is that the railway system doesn't improve, and that's one of the easiest systems to sort out with a little bit of investment. You have a situation where the existing infrastructure is just remaining the same. You have a situation where in many other countries, night work on infrastructure is quite normal. People work at night because then it doesn't really disrupt the travel on the roads and elsewhere. Seems to me that our infrastructure goes to sleep at night.
Well, Network Rail, of course. So our infrastructure is Network Rail, government run.
Sure.
They have £6.6 billion of revenue every year. They have 42,000 employees. It's not an insignificant number of people. What is stopping us from managing those people in a better way, like you say, working at night, working early in the morning, get this stuff done? This country just seems to be incredibly bad at managing people to just fix the stuff that needs fixing.
This is a big problem because the levels of productivity in transportation by European standards are very, very low. We haven't got the right attitude in terms of managerial ethos and work. Well, the work ethos is a huge problem. So until that's sorted out, this will not go away. But some of the problems this weekend are of our own making. They're not fundamentally infrastructural issues. They're just to do with bad planning.
Yeah.
But some aren't our fault, though. And we're talking about different things. And of course, on the railway, of course, excessive union power might be a factor. We certainly saw with ASLEF and their ability to bring the country to a halt with their strikes that they are a very powerful union. And if you're saying, well, suddenly I'm going to flex it and make you work at night, I dare say they'd have something to say. But on the other hand, with the airports, even though we've dropped our testing requirements and tracing requirements, the countries you're going to haven't. And that's not the fault of staff at airports in Britain. That's the situation.
If I can let's just have a look at some of the detail of how chaotic your travel might be. These are the cancellations. This one blew my mind. London Euston closed from Good Friday to Easter Monday. I mean, that is the biggest station.
Good luck getting to Birmingham.
In London. Good luck getting to Manchester. That is outrageous. Like, who thought that would be okay? Waterloo, Marylebone, Aylesbury via Parkway trains will not be running. I should put on my best announcer voice here, shouldn't I? Waterloo, Marylebone. No trains will run on the main Gatwick Express or Southern route from London Victoria.
That's
So
unbelievable
just
as well.
think about that. So if you're trying to get to the airport on the train, forget it. You're going to have to get a cab, which is going to block up the roads, which is going to worsen pollution. Stansted Express trains not running with rail replacement buses running to Essex Airport. I mean, do you think? I do wonder though. Given as I can't remember who it was now, but it said the fact that we haven't travelled an awful lot in the last 2 years. Should there have been a different attitude to the planning? Should the powers that be have said, look, everyone has been desperate to see their families for 2 years. Some of them, this will be the first time they've gone to visit the grandparents or the grandchildren. Let's give this Easter weekend. Let's take the works out of this picture and kick them into the next few weeks.
Well, I agree. It's unsustainable, and this will likely carry on through the summer and beyond. But I've also heard travel experts displacing the blame on the travellers themselves, saying they're almost rediscovering how to travel. For example, at airports, they forget to isolate liquids. They forget that we're not allowed above 100 millimetres to take us with us. And
we've been de-skilled. Lockdown has de-skilled us.
The process of going through customs and security, I think it's, a large part of the blame is due to infrastructure problems and indeed getting the right amount of staff to man all these jobs.
Yeah, there's definitely there is a workforce problem as well, as you said.
I mean, this last 3 weeks I've been in the Ukraine, I've been in Hungary, I've been in Italy, and I've been in Austria. And I can tell you one thing, the infrastructure there is far superior. Even Hungary, little Hungary has got a better infrastructure. You go to the airport and they just wave you through in a way that it would be unthinkable here. So I think we have a workforce problem, and we just haven't got the imagination to understand just how important it is for us to travel.
That's the word you used earlier, Alex, is there are imaginative ways that we can manage this situation. Who is lacking that imagination?
Oh, so I don't think you don't have to be that imaginative to improve our system,
No.
right? So it's a pretty low base, and I think it exists at every level of the scenario you're talking about. And as Frank was pointing out, I think frankly there is a work ethos problem. We're all told we must pretend that everyone who works in any kind of public service works really hard all the time, and you're a terrible person if you suggest otherwise. Actually, especially when it comes to some drivers and the tube, which I use all the time as a Londoner, is a great example of people who are paid very well to do not a great deal and hold the capital to ransom pretty often, right? So excessive unionisation and curbing thereof is a lesson we learned in the 1980s and seems we need to relearn again. So that's part one. Part two is we do have a massive managerial class in all of these systems, which isn't just true of transport, it's true of things like our health service too, and even our law enforcement. So that's the second. And I suppose the third would be what Frank was talking about being politically imaginative. I don't know if the right thing to do is to nationalise P&O, but I know that I would encourage having discussions like that to try and get us out of the situations that we're in. Instead, Britain just seems very stoic. We just seem to say to ourselves, oh, well, I mean, one summer the Central Line in London went down. I mean, if that happened in Paris, the government would fall. The hay bales would come out, there'd be protests all over the capital. Instead, in England, we say, for one day we say, oh, well, maybe not to be fixed, but God, people would pay attention to it. Instead, we just grumble and get on with it.
And we have, for example, we have this blockade of oil depots. Now, it's not directly, but it's indirectly related to this. What does the government do? It basically tells the oil companies to get their act together, to do something. And this is holding the country to ransom. It basically means that an essential element of our infrastructure that kind of makes our mobility possible is thwarted. And I just cannot understand why people just, oh yeah, this is interesting, this is happening.
That's right.
And, turn the page.
Should we though, Nabila? Should we all be accepting that the days of kind of universal travel, being able to go around the world and, well, I mean, crikey, all I'm looking for is to get my teenage son from London to a water park in Surrey on Monday morning on the train. I can't even do that. But do we have to all accept that those days are gone? And there are so many people, we need to apparently protect the planet, that we can't fly in the same way that we used to.
Well, we thought that the pandemic would have taught us that, but apparently, old habits die hard. And the moment we get our freedom back, we're back on the road and we're back in the air and we're back on trains. So I think it's a part of humanity to be curious, to move around, to go places. Having said that, my own view is that we have to learn to be more reasonable about moving around, not least of all for reasons linked to ecology and preserving the planet. But you can look at it on either side of the argument. Some people think that it's a wonderful thing that travel has immensely democratized, and an awful lot of people can travel on a low budget and discover different parts of the world. But the other side of the argument is we might have to be a bit more reasonable about that and think about the long-term future of the planet.
It's an important part of being a human being, isn't it,
Absolutely.
Frank?
It's our
to
humanity.
Want to see the world.
The quest for freedom is linked to this idea of being mobile and finding yourself through the journeys that you undertake. On Nabila's point about the cheapness, that might have been the case in the past. If you look at the rail fares, for example, in England, they are at an all-time high. They're going way above inflation rates. The airlines have really almost doubled many of their fares since the pandemic, so it's no longer the case that you're getting these cheap deals. So travel has become very, very expensive, not only very difficult, but very, very expensive for a lot of people.
Alex, I must say, boys, you look like you've got a bit of a tan today. Have you been sat in the garden, both?
Yes.
Yes, I thought you had.
Not Frank's garden, my own, but yes.
We're not that close yet.
No, not sat in each
Give it time. Give it time.
But I just think, is that one of the reasons you think, as people who live here in Great Britain, we're not going to complain this weekend because the sun is out.
Great weather.
It makes everything better.
It does.
But we should be angry, Frank.
That's the reason. That's the reason the first lockdown went so well for everyone trying to enforce it. We had really nice weather.
Oh, we're fickle and very shallow, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Do keep your socials coming to me on Twitter at GB News or at Beverly Turner. You can email as well, gbviews at GB News. So where next for you, Frank? If you could go anywhere, you can fly anywhere, where do you go?
I usually go to Italy, but I went skiing last month, which was the high point of my life in the last 2.5 years. And what I'd like to do is, as long as I live, I want to go skiing at least once a year.
Yeah.
And that's the buzz for me, the kind of, the white snow, the sun, the blue skies. It's a total experience. And if I was ever deprived of that, I'd be even a cratchier person than I'm now. It would just completely finish me off.
Okay, all right. Okay. Well, I hope you get out of your traffic jams wherever you are. As I say, do let us know how it's going for you. Do you share our frustrations at the fact that on a bank holiday weekend, everything just seems to come to a halt? Okay, Tesla boss Elon Musk has put in a $41 billion offer to take over Twitter to keep it a platform of free speech. But he's now worried it might not be successful. More on that next. Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, here until 7. My panel this evening, PR consultant Alex Dean, author and academic Frank Faridi, journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani. Now, I asked you to send in your socials about the travel situation. You have done just that. Don has said, we've driven down from Manchester to Dorset, towing our caravan. We didn't have any problems whatsoever. All right, don't rub it in, Dan. But that might be because we drove down on Wednesday. OK, that doesn't count.
That doesn't count. No, it's just cheating.
Phil says, Bev, I can't believe I'm hearing this. Don't go anywhere. It happens every bank holiday. No sympathy from me. Phil, if you're working all week, you've got your long weekend, you need that. Where is your sympathy? We can't just give up. And Pauline has said, what about us people whose lives are being sacrificed for travel? My Kent coastal hometown is a nightmare. Well, you live in Kent. I think what Pauline's getting at is that lots of out-of-towners moving in is ruining it for them. But you get to live in Kent all the time. So, again, I have no sympathy. Right, moving on. Love it or loathe it, Twitter has, in the words of Tesla boss Elon Musk, become the de facto town square. But, he says, it fails to adhere to the free speech principles, thereby undermining democracy. Musk, the world's richest man, is followed by 82 million people on Twitter. So when he speaks, many listen. Now, frustrated by the world's most popular social media platforms' increasingly censorious attitude, they're blocking accounts and adding misinformation labels willy-nilly, Musk is attempting to buy Twitter for $41 billion. The social media company is considering the bid, but the CEO, Parag Agrawal, has told staff that Twitter will not be held hostage by the offer. Let's come to you first, Alex. Why does this matter?
It matters because Twitter is where millions of people get their news, and it has become a forum in which people exercise their speech. hopefully free, and I think probably best characterised as free-ish. What you were setting out in your introduction, I think, is right. Increasing numbers of accounts have been blocked, frozen for 28 days and so forth. And I'm afraid my suspicion is a large number of them tend to be politically on the right. People on the left have answered that, have looked at that and answered it by saying, well, Twitter's a private company, it can do what it likes. I look forward to them cleaving to that point of view when it's owned by Elon Musk.
Well, I'm not even sure that left and right exists anymore after the last 2 years that we've had. I think that to some extent is a bit outdated. You are either pro-libertarian, you are a freedom believer in freedom and the rights of the individual, or you are not, I would argue. Frank?
I agree with you. And the tragedy is that those people who are the real free spirits and who kind of have opinions which go against the grain are often marginalized by Twitter. And very often, sort of people who read my articles tell me that Twitter tells them that this article is, not dangerous, but they got a particular expression. That's right, expression that they use. So there is a speech issue here, and sort of Alex is absolutely right. Although it's a private company, it's a public infrastructure, and that's the tragedy. The trouble is that even though Musk says that he believes in free speech, it's not going to change anything, because aside from Twitter, we have governments like our own who are passing new laws all the time, which basically try to regulate Twitter. And now, for example, they got this new law coming through.
The online harm safety bill.
Exactly, which is going to make things even worse. And this is a conservative government that's bringing that in.
And when you say even worse, just to clarify, what that means actually is that social media will be regulated in the way that the mainstream media.
It is, and there's this impulse on the part of public authorities to try to please everybody and not to be too offensive. And they forget the fact that any idea that's a serious good idea will offend somebody. Exactly. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a good idea.
Freedom of speech has to include the freedom to offend. Otherwise, it's not free at all. You can't just be... if free speech is only things you like, then there's no real meaningful free speech at all.
Nabila, I don't know are you busy on Twitter? Are you a busy Twitterer?
Relatively busy, yeah. I use it a lot as a journalist.
What do you use it for?
Well, mainly to interact with colleagues, follow the news, and post my own journalistic work. Yeah.
Do you think it's a force for good? And do we need it to be entirely free from censorship in order to do what it is meant to do?
Well, I think generally speaking, it's a very good thing. But, my own view on freedom of expression is very basic. I think there should be no censorship of any words that are not illegal and which indeed respect provable facts. And that's the bottom line, facts and truth. And people often forget that public decency and indeed the freedom not to be abused are actually firmly protected by a raft of legislation. So, for example, if you abuse somebody, then you are committing a criminal offence, and you are likely, and rightly, likely to end up being convicted. Now, this won't change, no matter who is in charge of social media. And yes, you can argue that it's very difficult to report someone, or indeed prosecute someone, but this is no different to anything else. And I think the principle that we have to bear in mind is that illegal activity is not allowed, and there's no need for special restrictions when it comes to apply that to freedom of speech. And similarly, I think one of the problems we're having, and we will always have, in establishing what are alleged facts, what alleged facts are true, and indeed which ones are being made up. But I think in that area, we also have to use our common sense and be sensible about all these cases. If, there's a pattern of someone who is a provable liar, then you can imply that, this person will be hard to be taken seriously.
Well, we thank you. We've had a Twitter poll running with our GB News viewers, which we can have a look at. And we asked, as reports suggest, Elon Musk is going to buy Twitter to protect free speech. So we have asked, does the platform allow free speech? I don't have the results at the moment, I don't think, looking at it. That is our... OK, 88% of you say no, the platform does not allow free speech. 88% of you. So that really does beg the question, how many of us would have to think it doesn't exist for it to for us to fail to engage with it, because we are engaging on it. I'm on it a lot, and I know that you have to be careful. I don't want to be careful, but we're still using it, even though the majority of us feel that we are being censored in some way.
Yeah. Well, we have no choice because, unfortunately, we haven't got a platform like Twitter, and Twitter is really quite important because anybody who's anybody that matters is on it. I'm a free speech absolutist. I don't accept the fact that, for example, we're in a position to decide what is true and what isn't.
Exactly.
I know what is true, but very often, I've heard people say what I think is true to be denounced for promoting fake news.
And I would still allow that, though, because I know,
You've got to allow
I
that.
think that I know what is true, but other people have different perspectives. And if we give up to the platform the ability to decide what facts are, then effectively we allow them to censor what people say, in a sense of disagreement, effectively, and say there is one form of truth and it is theirs. But we also empower those people to basically police new ideas, because when new ideas come up, people always think that they're wrong, and it's only through free debate and free discussion that they flourish.
And it's only now that we discovered that all these fake news about, for example, the pandemic is now actually seen as the truth, sort of a year after the event. So we have a situation where we were told that China is exemplary in the way they handle the pandemic. We're going to learn from China. You look at the situation in Shanghai today, and all of a sudden it becomes very, very clear that that was just fake. They were the ones with the fake news, not our side.
Well, obviously the pandemic has. This is what I think has made a lot of us aware, and maybe 'twas ever thus. Maybe Twitter was always more of a political setting than we may have realised. But just to give you an idea of some of this is from Twitter's own pages, where they say we'll apply labels to tweets. So this is a label basically to say that this is misinformation, and you get one strike in accordance with the strike policy, and I think a couple, and then you get a ban. But it says false or misleading information about preventative measures one can take to avoid infections, such as claims that face masks cause bacterial pneumonia or do not work to reduce transmission. Now, there's a whole host of them that they use in relation to COVID, which are scientifically debatable. And so when they are saying, well, this is fact, that's science denying, is it not, Nabila, when it's talking about the pandemic and COVID? I mean, they're saying this is what we will take you down for. That's propaganda.
Well, I think we have to look at situations as they come up and deal with them accordingly. But I think most of the time, if some people want to make themselves look stupid, at least we can call them out. And, I think what bothers me about social media is the really nasty stuff when you start breaching the law. And I think one solution to deal with that potentially is to insist that every user has to reveal their identity and why not, in some cases, linked their account to a credit card number.
Oh, no, I would disagree with that.
So that would allow, let me carry on with my argument, that could even allow suspensions and even fines if, we come across really bad behaviour. And I think, generally speaking, Twitter users are very good at regulating each other.
But you see, saying that masks work would be or saying that masks don't work, would be considered really bad behaviour by Twitter, and that could get you taken off, whereas I can find you thousands of doctors.
I don't approve of anybody being taken off. There've been discussions about, Trump being taken off Twitter. Why are the Taliban on Twitter, for example? Why is Putin on Twitter, for example? I think, in the end, you have to call out those people and interact with them. It's like in life, you have to deal with people you disagree with, as long as you respect the law.
The only thing that you can censor legitimately is incitement to violence.
Yes.
I think that's something where we draw the line, but anything else, I think, is open game. That's what free exchange of views is really all about.
Yeah, absolutely. OK, well, we are carrying on to freely exchange our views here, and do keep getting in touch with us on Twitter at GB News. OK, coming up, clothes store Monsoon says that its female changing rooms are open to both sexes. Grr. After a complaint from a customer, we're going to ask the panel what they think about that. Welcome back to Dewbs & Co. Thank you for listening on your DAB radio, for watching on your telly, on YouTube and also on the app. Now here with me until 7, my panel, PR consultant Alex Dean, author and academic Frank Faridi, journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani. OK, the clothes store Monsoon has said that its female changing rooms are open to both sexes, after teenager Charlie Moore, who identifies as non-binary, was left humiliated when they were blocked from the women's fitting room to try on a prom dress. Monsoon later apologised, saying that its changing rooms are open and available to all customers. And the incident comes after the Equality and Human Rights Commission said it is perfectly legal for public bodies and businesses to limit services to a single sex. So let's have a look at this story. So Charlie is 18. Now, we wouldn't know about this story if Charlie hadn't gone on Twitter and said, "Hi, Monsoon, UK, just been into your Birmingham store to try on a couple of prom dresses, but was told I wasn't allowed to because of my gender assigned at birth. Could you confirm if this is the company policy? Thank you." Now, of course, the UK being the UK, some eagle-eyed journalist saw that and thought, oh, this is good, and have basically written about it. And Monsoon had apologised, and they gave Charlie some free dresses for the perfect prom dress that they would need. But this raises, I think, a very, very important debate, a really important issue about safe spaces for females. It is not just about whether you should be able to try on a dress without somebody seeing your bottom through the curtain of a changing room, although that is obviously important to us. But it is about having safe spaces for women that are not compromised because one individual makes a bit of a fuss. Nabila, coming to you. Am I summing that up in a little bit of a simplistic way, or do you agree with me?
But I think it's simplistic but fair.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all about safe spaces in the end, and safe spaces for everybody. And the UK's equality body has actually reacted to this story, and they have said that Monsoon were, in fact, within their rights to remove Charlie from the changing room, following complaints from women and indeed children, but only as long as a gender-neutral changing room was also provided for transgender people and indeed non-binary people. So the Equality Commission's guidelines to limit services to single-sex people comes with the caveat if the reasons are justifiable and indeed proportionate. Well, in this case, it seems reasonable to assume that they were all that because there were complaints by women and indeed children. And I think they should, we should move the debate to allowing specific spaces for transgender people, non-binary people, not just in services as in this case, but also the debate is expanding to a whole host of areas in society, including transgender people being allowed to compete with women in sports, but also to use facilities such as changing room hospitals, prison services, and the like, shelters, you name it. I think it's fair to say that the law should protect individuals such as these women and children in this case of this story to assert their right in relation to issues such as privacy, decency, and indeed the right to prevent trauma. And one very fair way, in my view, to look at it is one individual's liberties stop when they encroach on other people's freedoms.
Well,
Frank?
I can promise your listeners that when I try on my prom dress, I'm going to do it in a male changing room, and I will not encroach on anybody else. I think the very fact that we're having this discussion indicates how messed up British culture has become. We're getting to the point now where we're kind of trying to reorganize our life around the attempt by a very small number of people to play around with their identity. So we have to annihilate our own identity and subordinate who we are in order to make some other people comfortable, whereas there's a very sensible solution to this. Let transgender people who believe in gender neutrality have their own changing room, so they can hang out with each other, but allow women to be only with women, biological women, and men to be only with biological men. It's a very kind of obvious point to me, but the issue at stake is that from their point of view, that's no good. They want to impose their culture on us, so they want to be with women biological woman, because that way they can demonstrate that they are the same as far as the identity is concerned.
Well, it's really complicated, this, isn't it? Because, of course, if you are a transgender person who has transitioned from male to female, you are presumably happy to use and wish to use the female facilities, be that a changing room, a toilet, a prison, a hospital, whatever. If you are female, transitioned to male, you want to use the male facilities. This person, Charlie, is a non-binary person. So are we saying that we have to also provide facilities for people who don't fit into either category? I kind of think no. Alex?
Well, since the dawn of recorded time, women have fought for equality with men. And as we live through the first sort of 2-3 generations at most, at which it might even be argued that that's been realised, we now have a clutch of, and it mostly is men, claiming to be female and saying, now I get to come into the female space that you've won.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of a better example of the patriarchy in action, right? And yet it's only old-fashioned conservatives who seem to be on the side of feminists and saying you're entitled to be a woman and have a safe space. It seems to me that, especially in these examples, we run the risk of letting a vanishingly small but very loud group of people who've bizarrely demanded the defence of feminists to be on their side when their actions are profoundly anti-feminist, not just to distort society, as Frank was setting out, but basically make a farce of women's sports, embarrass. I mean, I always feel sorry for businesses like the ones that have just been picked out here. Terribly sorry for
can't win from a
drag
PR
to the public
point of view.
eye.
I mean, they apologised because that seemed like it was the right thing to do.
It makes a mockery of a whole series of things, and we are supposed to pretend that black is white and that up is down. There has to come a time when we say, stop. If you've got a penis, you're not a woman.
And that's the bottom line.
I'll drink to that.
And on that bombshell, no. But I mean, I think the thing is, that, as I say, this particular individual, Charlie, we do not know what his. No, he says he was a. This is why it's complicated, right? Does he say that he was born a male? I think he was born friend. There was two of them, Charlie and his mate. His friend does not identify as female, but okay, I've got it now, because his friend presents in a more feminine way, even though he is also non-binary. It's very complicated, isn't it? Yeah. And so I guess what we're saying is we're in a period of transition, are we not, where we would all agree it is wonderful that we are not living in a homophobic world anymore.
Of course.
That people are free to choose to dress as they like, whether that's in a monsoon changing room or in the privacy of their own home, that they should be free to do that. But we are at risk of making such huge cultural shifts, and that those will be at the expense of women, as Alex has just said, aren't they? Because I can't think of many instances in this debate which are at the expense of men.
But you put your finger on where the problem lies, I think, because now we are talking about these issues involving huge societal shifts, and that's where it's not an issue, it's not something that's, irrelevant. It's becoming very much to the fore, and that's why it's crucial that the legislator steps in. The legislature only comes in when there's a substantial problem. And I think it's becoming one, because on the one hand, you've got a group with legitimate agenda, wanting to exist, wanting to have a safe space in society, and nobody would want to deny them that space. But on the other hand, there's another group of people who feel threatened. So we have to get the legislature to come in and legislate in a fair manner so that everybody feels comfortable, protected, and indeed included.
Yeah, but when we have laws coming in, we always tend to make things worse, because the minute you have new rules and laws on interpersonal relationship, we heighten the tensions and the conflict. And the experience shows the last 20 years is that laws don't create a nice, normal, harmonious situation. What laws create is the demand for even more laws.
Well, they put boundaries, at least, and especially in institutions such as schools, hospitals, which are government-run.
But the boundaries were already there. When I was a young man, I would see there's a toilet with a man on it. I would know that's a male toilet. There would be a toilet with a woman on it. It's a woman toilet. Now, all that we need to do is to make sure that we have some gender-neutral sort of toilets made available. And then the problem's solved.
Well, you would hope that common sense would prevail, but in some situations it's not the case.
But in part because people are positively out to have the problem. People are out to provoke the issue, then actually, I mean, I don't know about this individual's example, and put that to one side. My point is that some people will go out of their way to be told they can't do something. It's like men who've tried to go and have a wax and be told, well, sorry, we only do women. At which point, this big, hairy, bearded bloke says, you're discriminating against me because you won't wax my nether regions. I mean, you are deliberately trying to provoke the situation and then call the other person bigoted. It's quite wrong.
But I think it's quite to go to get a back, sack and crack. This is what we're getting at here, Alex, isn't it? I think that's quite different. I think they would have a point to say you should be able to treat me, to give me the beauty therapy that I need.
Apparently not. So apparently this poor woman recently who was asked to go and give a bloke a Brazilian said, well, I can't because you don't have the requisite equipment.
Oh, I see.
Exactly.
And so you meant that put the therapist in a vulnerable position.
It puts the therapist in a room with a person with a penis who's saying, I want a Brazilian.
And I would think in that situation, though, the relationship exists between a beauty therapist and their client. It should clearly be obvious that whether that beauty therapist is prepared to treat that man's nether regions with the wax or not. But I think that is sort of easily fixable, right? You say, that is not what I do. These are my personal boundaries. But what's happening in these debates is the boundaries are being changed for all of us. And as a mother of two daughters, I particularly worry about toilets becoming joint spaces because as women fought to have a space where we could... Public toilets allowed us to go out into the world. It's crazy to think that there was a time when there were no public toilets for women. That bought us our liberty. And actually, there was a time for me growing up that if a man walked into a women's toilet, you knew he was up to no good. It was the safe space you could go to. If you're on a night out, you felt threatened, you could go in the women's toilets. My daughters are very much at risk of never having that. And that worries me. But
and
also,
people will claim that's progress.
Yeah. And it's not progress. No. Because it also renders young men vulnerable. Because if a teenage boy goes into the mixed toilets and can be accused of something he hasn't done, well, no one else was there and we were in the toilets.
But also, especially young girls, it confuses them. Because when that boy dressed up as a girl comes into the toilet, he's saying that I'm just like you are. And you better believe it, you better accept it. And that confuses people's identity when they're very, very young.
And actually, you're so right, Frank. And it's about, you've been getting in touch with us on socials. I'm going to come to those in just a moment, thank you. But it's about understanding the difference as well, actually, critically, between children and adults.
Exactly.
Because when I took my young children to the swimming pool just for a swim when they were little, there became a point when it was inappropriate to have my son in the girls' toilets. And that's a kind of rite of changing rooms. That's a rite of passage, isn't it? Well, you need to go in there with daddy now because you're too old to be in here with the girls. And that, I mean, I know that there'll be people watching this going, but you are so old-fashioned, Bev. You are so outdated. That is an important lesson for both genders to learn.
It's the essential foundation of child development.
Yeah.
The first distinction they make is between the two genders. And if that boundary becomes confused as it is now, it's going to mess up a whole generation of young kids. That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah. How do we fix this, eh? Right, what have you been saying? Monsoon changing rooms. Deirdre has said female changing rooms should only be for the use of biological females. End of. Peter says, if Charlie tried to enter the female dressing rooms while my niece was in there, trying on her prom dress, I would ask him to wait until she had left. If he insisted on entering, I would physically prevent him. This is the problem, is it causes genuine conflicts and arguments, probably where there doesn't need to be any, but somehow we have to all live together. Barbara says, can't he go into the men's and try on dresses there? What actually is the difference? Well, the trouble is Monsoon is a women's shop. That's why there was no male changing rooms. And Sandra has said making separate changing rooms for trans women. I'm not sure that entirely separate entities work. Do they, Nabila?
Well, I think they do. I mean, if everybody feels safe in the end and not excluded, then I think that's the way forward.
You see, this is, a lot of people are going to say that's a terrible thing to say, but I have heard the suggestion that actually the disabled toilets, which we quite rightly should have for people to use, and I often wondered if you are in a wheelchair, how you must be so frustrated by this conversation because it took a very, very long time to provide disability toilets. And a lot of buildings still don't get that right. And yet, a very noisy minority come along and say, but I want a space for me. And we are going to, it looks like we're going to accommodate it if we're not careful.
Yes, and I think it's turning into the tyranny of the minority in a way.
Yeah.
Now, we don't want to stigmatize any group. They're perfectly entitled to feel part and parcel of society, comfortable in their bodies, comfortable in their workplace and the rest of it. But, and there's a big but, which is a caveat of the vast majority of other people who have equal rights.
Yeah. Tyranny of the minority,
Yeah.
Frank.
I mean, I don't want my children or anybody else's children being confused because a small number of people decide that they want to play with their identity, because they will mess up their identity. And that, to me, is the crucial issue. That's much more important than anybody's individual needs. We're talking about a whole generation of young people who are growing up disoriented and confused.
Yeah, well, not if they watch GB News, right? We will keep your feet on the ground. We will keep your teenagers clarified and everything they need to know. Right, thank you, panel. If you missed any of today's show, you want to catch up on the episode, you can download it to wherever you get your podcasts, etc. I'll be back on Monday. Have a lovely weekend.